The preparation phase is just as important, and I would say even more important than taking the exam itself. The way that you prep is inevitably, if you do it really, really well, get you to the point that you want to be at. Welcome back, you guys. I am Emily. This is my channel, Language Travel Adoptee, and I'm here to talk to you about the very stressful yet joyful and overwhelming, exciting process of prepping for an official language exam. In my case, that was the Spanish DELE C1 exam. But if you are watching this video and you are studying for another exam in another language, all of this knowledge is also going to be really helpful. So before I really get into what I wish I had known, I think it's important to give you guys context about what I actually imagined myself doing. And all of this, by the way, can be found in my How I Am Studying video. But when we are in a prep phase, if you're like me, we have all of these ideas about how we want to prep, and then we go through the time period that we've prepped for, and our preparation actually turns out to look a little bit different. So to give you guys context, I started to study for the DELE exam about 4 months before actually taking the exam. I had the amazing opportunity to actually go to Peru, really improve my Spanish up until maybe a B2, and then come back to the United States where I live and make sure I could really refine each of the 4 skills, listening, reading, writing, and speaking, up to a C1 level, before then taking my exam on April 4th of this year. And my prep work really involved just doing 1 speaking exercise and then 1 writing exercise with 1 DELE teacher that I found on italki, who is also an examiner for all levels of the exam. I did that up until maybe February, and then I thought about readjusting my strategy for more intense preparation for the next few months. You know, I had planned to do Baselang, which is a platform that you can use to essentially talk to a native speaker in Spanish at any point in your day. I plan to do that every day for these next few months. Actually find a variety of DELE teachers on italki, so I wouldn't be used to speaking with the same teacher. I wanted to stick to writing an essay 2 times per week because I knew that was going to be easy for me to maintain since I like to write anyways. Now, what I actually did was I did stick to writing 2 days per week. Instead of talking every day using Baselang especially, I basically took a 1.5 week break because I was actually on vacation in Colombia, and I wanted to make sure I was actually enjoying the vacation and enjoying the place that I was visiting. Now, that was not planned as part of my prep work, but it helped me really maintain my listening skills since their accent is different from what content I was consuming just by myself at home. And of course, I could also speak every day and in person with other people. I was also dating someone who spoke Spanish, so that was, again, a huge advantage that I don't think I would have in other languages for prepping for other official exams. Another thing that really didn't go to plan that I assumed I would start earlier than I did was do mock exams, which I started 3 to 4 weeks into the actual taking of the exam. And that also includes starting reading and listening exercises way later. Neither of those I would advise just for your stress levels, because I was very, very stressed, and I had realized I had put off working on my weaker skills until around the very end. Now, during the exam, I was super, super nervous. I was in a room of about maybe 10 other students, and we were in those traditional desks that you sit at in high school. We had writing utensils provided by the actual institute. My hands were shaking like this. And that meant also that during the reading portion, which is the very first portion that you're tested on, I was having a complete brain fog, especially during the very first exercise. And I swear my brain was not picking up anything. Now, as time went on, I gradually got more into my student mode, right? And I was able to calm my nerves down a little bit more by really immersing myself into what I was reading, and I could better rely on the strategies that I set up in order to take the reading portion. Listening went the exact same way. I was very nervous in the beginning, but eventually I knew, okay, I'm gonna have to really pay attention because I'm going to miss everything that I need in order to answer each question correctly, because those listening comprehension questions come at you really, really fast. But again, I had prepared somewhat before taking the official exam, so I knew the format. The writing portion as well, I finished maybe 10 minutes early, and that was really where my strength started to shine. I'm glad they tested my weaker skills first, because I knew that the way that the test was graded, despite how I did on reading and listening, my weaker skills, if I can compensate that with my stronger skills in writing and speaking, then I'm going to feel a lot better. So writing flowed pretty well, and speaking did as well, even though I had to wait for about 2.5 hours where I really couldn't relax because I was so nervous about the speaking portion. Overall, it was a full workday to take this exam, 7.5 hours out of my day. And with all that being said, I will give you guys an update as soon as I get the results officially, but I do feel like I passed the exam. But again, my prep process was not the most perfect. So here are some things that I wish I had done to lower my stress level, make me feel like I was even more prepared, especially going in to test my weaker skills. I wish I had focused on improving my weaker skills sooner. As I said before, I started to prep these skills about 3 to 4 weeks only before taking the official exam. And I wish I had actually started maybe 2 months in advance. Instead, I was left feeling like I was scrambling and trying to cram so many expressions and new vocabulary in my brain, especially for the reading. And of course, we know when we go into these language exams, it's not just testing the knowledge that you have of the language, it is also testing how you organize your ideas, how logical and comprehensive you can express yourself, and understanding implied meanings of a text, as well as a lot of technical vocabulary in a lot of professional settings, and also testing how well you are at taking the exam. So I was worried about all 3 of those things at once, and I just wish that I had started earlier in order to spread that work out. You will see in the reel that I posted on my same channel about feeling all of this stress right here, because I actually used last year's DELE C1 exam to do both the reading and listening for the very first time, and I got a 26 out of 40 for reading and a 22 out of 30 on listening. And once I got the results, I was freaking out because I think I had assumed, you know, in other languages, reading and listening weren't a problem for me, so I won't have to worry about those. I'm just going to focus on a lot of speaking, and that's going to be okay. But something I wish I had known as well is that speaking will not help you really fine-tune your skills in all of the other areas that you need to in order to pass this exam. To a certain degree, especially up until maybe high B1, B2 levels, speaking and really getting crisp on how well you are speaking, it will help fine-tune your skills a lot more in writing, in reading, and in listening. But if you are interested in taking a C1 more advanced level exam, then your passive vocabulary has to be much, much more vast. And I wish I had started before that. Another thing I wish I hadn't done is sign up for taking the exam during a really stressful week that I already knew was going to be stressful. Like, I was planning to go to an entirely different country where I didn't speak the language fluently, and of course handling at the same time all of the logistics of moving to a new country. It was just way too much. And then also knowing that because I had waited so long to work on reading and listening, I didn't have energy to drill as much as I wanted those exercises from mock exams. So again, think about the logistics surrounding the date of the exam. If you have any sort of appointments that you know you have to make, or if you know that you can have more flexibility that week and set yourself for the maximum energy and focus that you can have during that week, that is what I wish I would have done to not feel so exhausted. Another thing I regret not having done earlier, and this goes with the reading portion as well with one of my weaker skills, is not having made a vocabulary list sooner. But again, at a certain point in a language, when you are working towards an advanced level, you can retain vocabulary more easily than if you were at an intermediate B1 level, B2 level even. And so it wasn't a huge thing for me to read an article every day and then write down every word I didn't know. But again, I started that process much later, and I wish I had started it sooner. I also wish I had consumed more content from Spain. I absolutely love how Mexican Spanish sounds. I love how Colombian Spanish sounds, right? But I never felt really pulled towards Spain Spanish in particular. And because of that, I consumed naturally a lot more content from Latin American countries. That was a mistake. In fact, in the audio section of this year's DELE exam, there were a lot of idiomatic expressions that came from Spain. Now, official language exams usually test your skills from all of the countries where that language is spoken. And so I thought I would just be okay with the idiomatic expressions list that my DELE examiner teacher had given me. However, on the actual exam, there were still a lot of things that I didn't understand because I hadn't been consuming content consistently. I also wish I had counted my actual words for writing essays sooner. Now, I told you that writing was more of my stronger suit. I had just started counting my words maybe about 3 to 4 weeks as well before the exam started. And my DELE teacher, who was used to grading all of my writing, kept on saying, oh yeah, this is great, like you included everything that an examiner would be looking for. Well, it dawned on me as I was taking a baseline practice test, I was writing maybe 2.5 pages. And the fact of seeing on every single writing piece, okay, you only have 182 to 120 words for writing this piece. And for some reason, it didn't dawn on me until very late in the process that I really needed to adhere to those guidelines. Otherwise, everything else that went past that guideline would not be graded. And my teacher was like, I thought you were counting your words. So this was totally on me. It was not on her. I will say when you are prepping with an examiner, they are going to give you a lot of really good resources, but you also need to be aware of the exact guidelines of what they are asking for. Because if I had any problem with writing, it was mainly not going over the limit. So I really had to work on this. Also, I wish I knew that you could actually meet your examiners before the actual exam day. They're the ones that usually run classes anyways at the institute if you do happen to be close to the institute. I was on the other side of the ocean from the institute that I was going to take the exam at, so this wouldn't have been possible for me, but I think my nerves would have been a lot more calm, especially for the speaking portion, if I actually knew who was going to administer the exam in the first place. So there are ways to do that. Now, for the things that I'm so grateful to myself for doing and what also led me to success, despite a lot of these setbacks, one is I'm so glad that I went in with the mindset knowing that I will not understand everything. I will always have in my knowledge of a language because learning a language never stops. And I know that there are so many words, so much widening of vocabulary that I had to do in order to get to a place where I felt good enough to take the exam that it was just inevitable to need to internalize, okay, I won't know everything, and that's okay. It is still possible to pass. People who have already done this exam haven't known everything, and they passed too, and that makes me feel better. I don't need to be perfect. If we keep on thinking, I'm going to nitpick my way, for example, through everything there is to know about the subjunctive in Spanish, or any sort of grammar point really that you can think about in a language that has given you problems before, depending on when we are prepping for the exam, especially if the date for taking the exam is getting closer, our want to understand absolutely every single situation where, in my case, the subjunctive needs to be employed or not employed, etc. There are a lot of exceptions to this rule in Spanish anyways. That would have distracted me from working on dedicating more time to my weaknesses. That would have a much greater effect on my overall grade than just knowing absolutely every single thing about the subjunctive. So again, just be really careful about this when you are prepping, that the things that you focus most on are going to get the best, as we say, bang for your buck, instead of fixating so much, being a perfectionist like me, on very small details. Always think what is going to get you to your goal the most efficiently. And again, when you are prepping for an exam like this, you get to the point where you really build trust in your own skills. So even though you know inevitably, maybe on the reading section, that I will not understand fully, I trust my skills enough that I've built to understand the context around that word. So eventually I will probably have an idea at least of what this word means. Same in the speaking section. If there is a vocabulary word that I am not sure of, I can still say, okay, when I am giving my oral presentation about what I just read for the speaking section, I am going to skip what I don't know and expand more on what I do know. And then probably with more context, as I'm talking with the text practitioner, he is probably going to give me even more details. If he does bring up something that I didn't mention in the text, in my summary, when we actually have a conversation about it in the second part of the speaking exam, if he does bring this word up that I don't know at all, he will probably add context around it anyways. So again, prepping for the exam is just as much about knowing the format, knowing how to logically tell about your ideas, as well as trusting your skills. Another thing I'm really glad that I knew about in advance that working with particularly a DELE examiner was helpful for was knowing how everything is graded. As I said before, for in particular the DELE C1 exam, the listening and speaking parts are graded together and the reading and writing parts are also graded together. Now this might differ from other levels in DELE. This will probably differ a little bit depending on if you're doing a whole another language exam, but the concept is the same. It is very wise for you to know in advance how everything will be graded, because inevitably every speaker is not going to be at the exact same level with all of the 4 skills. That is very hard to maintain, and it's also comforting to know you can always overcompensate with your stronger skills for weaker skills that you may have developed later, like I did, or or you just don't practice as often. Another thing that helped me was knowing specific strategies that I would use on the exam, especially when nerves kick in, which they inevitably will during exam day. You already have in the back of your head, how exactly am I going to approach this one topic, this one task that they are inevitably going to give me in this exact format. So for reading, you will notice here that I always used a scratch paper to write down every single answer. And I did this because specifically in a reading comprehension task, you would have to read a whole passage and then have about 5 or 6 sentences that you then, depending on the context, had to put in each of the blanks to make a full coherent story. I found it great to cross off on paper whatever did not fit inside a blank so that I wouldn't be wasting more time reading over the same things, getting a little bit mixed up. Oh, what goes here? What goes there? Did I already think about putting this in that space or this space? So really physically writing down and crossing off what I knew was not going to go in each space helped me extremely and also saved me time. For writing, I practiced every single writing prompt that this test could possibly give me. Again, that was great on my DELE teacher for giving me all of the possible ways that they would ask of me. One, for example, was writing a review about a particular film. And already before going into the exam, in case there would be a question like that, I already knew, okay, what is the title of the film in Spanish, because you can't use any sort of English terminology? What are the exact phrases for director? This star was the protagonist, etc. Really relevant vocabulary that I knew would summarize the film that I wanted to do perfectly. I also knew exactly how to sign off on a formal letter, what other transitions I needed, how to even start a paragraph. All of that I knew super, super well. And I started learning all of these things for writing about 4 months in advance. So you bet I was very confident on the writing portion. I also studied very carefully any errors that I would make during practice tasks with my teacher that she would correct so that I knew how to not make them on the exam day. Another thing I'm super thankful for, especially as a budget language learner, is knowing that paid resources are totally worth it. Now I know that we see a lot in the language learning world of, okay, how can we learn languages for free, etc. How can we get to our goals for free, essentially? And that is great. However, if you are taking the exam and you're probably paying a higher fee in order to take it, I really suggest also pairing that with really good prep materials that you will have to pay for. Just don't cut corners on your budget in order to save money. What the paid resources are there for is to feel super, super prepared. Another thing that I did was knowing my boundaries. Let me explain this more, because there is such a thing as practicing way too much and stressing ourselves out, and actually getting rest and restoration for the energy that we will need to invest in during exam day. Now, this is going to be different for absolutely everyone, and for me, there was really no set level. There was a lot of self-trust involved in saying to myself, okay, Emily, I know that you have not practiced reading, which again are going to be your weaker skills as you go into this. Please don't tire yourself out. There is such a thing as overstudying. You have done as much as you can. You need to rest so that you can have optimal energy for that test day. Especially in that final week, it gets really critical. And again, this is something that we need to listen to our bodies for. Know when you are actually overstudying. It's kind of like when you are playing an instrument and you are about to have your first recital and you are really trying to get the song that you're practicing into your muscle memory. But again, your muscles are going to get really tired if you do over practice, and the same for overstudying. Another thing I'm grateful for is writing everything by hand for the writing portion, especially since that's going to be how you are going to probably have to submit your own paper for any writing session for an official exam. Another thing that I really advise everyone to do is actually get a examiner, not just a teacher, as the person that you are going to pick to help you prep for the exam. There are, in my case, a lot of DELE teachers, but the DELE examiners, who are also teachers, always know exactly how the tests are going to be graded. They know more nuances of the test format itself, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, than a regular DELE teacher would. Another thing I'm really grateful for is having picked the examination center that I did. Now, I do know at the Instituto Cervantes location in Istanbul, I knew that there were going to be noises around, probably a window open. These centers are not all created equal. Some can be a little bit sketchy looking, and some can also be more distraction filled. So just as you are concentrating really hard during exam day, know know that some distractions might happen. I am also very glad that I knew my strengths, identified them, and maintained them even as I worked on my weaknesses and identified them even more. It's very easy, especially as someone who has a very academic background, who define themselves in how well I did in academics, especially in school, letting go a little bit of that identity and realizing that our emotions as we are now adults outside of a school environment who are going back into prepping for an exam, this was hard for me to manage because I thought, when I am doing a practice exam, for example, if I don't get a good score that I am satisfied with from the very beginning, then this means I'm automatically going to fail everything. I used to be, an all A student, and what am I even doing now, right? Feeling those uncomfortable emotions, but looking at the facts right in front of you. For example, when I saw that I got on last year's DELE test only a 26 out of 40 on reading the very first time that I took it, I freaked out, and then I next had to determine my next step, which were specifically asking my DELE teacher examiner, okay, where do you honestly see my progress? This is how many articles I want to start to read a day. This is how much time I'm going to devote to looking back at vocabulary that I noted from practicing reading. But I was able, through the facts, to really solidify next steps instead of just freaking out and spending so much energy on why am I not good enough, basically, and thoughts of, I'm going to fail this exam automatically, because no, again, these exams are graded in such a way that you can overcompensate from your weaker areas with your stronger areas. Another thing I did, and this also goes in with the previous point I mentioned, was I talked compassionately to myself throughout this process as much as I could, right? There are times when we grit our teeth and we just think, okay, I'm going to berate myself, talk down to myself in order to get to my goal, because that is what has helped me in the past achieve things. So I'm going to try this as well. And long term, I have found in any of my language learning studies, not just prepping for an official exam, that this has really deteriorated my motivation. And it has made me feel really unsafe in my language learning, how I have treated myself. So I really wanted to make sure during such a roller coaster ride with exam prep that I, at least whenever I was facing problems, because they're inevitably going to come up, that I at least was talking to myself as if I were my own best friend. Honestly, sounds cheesy, but it really does work, and it does make a difference in how you are finding joy in a sometimes very stressful preparation phase of studying for an exam. And what I'm about to say now also goes into the other points, is that I am so thankful to myself for jumping into the unknown. I will never know how the exam feel until I actually get there. There's no way for how I can prepare myself in that sense, and that's okay. This is a new language learning experience, and talking to myself again in a really understanding way and saying that, yes, Emily, you can do hard things, really, really helped me too, despite being really, really nervous and feeling a lot of uncomfortable feelings in my learning, gave me that self-trust that I needed to make it through. And I am super thankful to myself for having planned logistics the day of the exam as well as the night before the exam. Now I did, as I said before, have a very, very hectic travel schedule. I was running on jet lag. I had traveled about 48 hours in 72 hours to get to Istanbul in the first place from the USA, trying to adapt to a new country. However, I am very glad that I looked at the address of where the exam would be beforehand, order a taxi in order to get there because I was really worried about taking public transport and being late. I printed out everything. I made sure the night before to have my ID, my passport, as well as my resguardo, which is, what's that word in English? Confirmation of my payment for the exam was physically with me. Set out my clothes, made sure to set several alarm clocks, etc. I would go to bed at a certain time, around 10 p.m., and I even took melatonin in order to make myself feel sleepy. Think about your own logistics that you want to keep in mind so that you do have the most energy that you can give for exam day. The preparation phase is just as important, and I would say even more important than taking the exam itself. The way, and this can be for any level, you guys, the way that you prep for the exam is inevitably, if you do it really, really well, get you to the point that you want to be at. Now, with Spanish specifically, I felt like I was stuck at a B2 for the longest time. That is my personal definition of the intermediate language learning plateau. And before, I felt really really demotivated to get past a B2 because English, my native language, is so close to Spanish anyways, and it was just hard to motivate myself. Well, with a C1 exam in the midst of everything, that really helped my motivation. It made the process of really diving deeply into a language strangely more joyous, even though it was stressful. And I want to emphasize that if you really do prep well, you will inevitably get to that next level. All of the vocabulary, all of the different situations that I had to use Spanish in, really challenging myself with specific terminology, not just circumventing and talking around the specific word. All of that really helped me take my Spanish to the next level. I do love to help language learners who are passion-driven in their languages, who are very ambitious, who tend to be perfectionists as well, and really help them get to feeling more of themselves in their language, confidently learning their languages on their own terms. So make sure to check the description below if you are interested in potentially working with me as your language coach. I'd love to meet you. Other than that, please give this video a like if you did find it helpful, as well as subscribe. I'm coming out with a lot of new content this year, and I want to take you on the journey with me. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.